study section 5, knowledge, belief, distinction. Introduction. In this study section, we shall attempt to explore the meaning and nature of knowledge, learning outcomes. When you have studied this section, you should be able to describe the nature of knowledge. What is knowledge? The branch of the discipline of philosophy referred to as epistemology or theory of knowledge is generally accepted to be concerned with the nature of knowledge. To that extent, it focuses on issues such as the origin of knowledge, the place of experience in generating knowledge, the possibility of knowledge, the relationship between knowledge and certainty, the possibility of universal skepticism, and the changing forms of knowledge that arise from new conceptualizations of the world. And so, the history of the discourse of epistemology can be described as the attempt to delineate the meaning and nature of knowledge. To this end, at least in the traditional sense, knowledge has been regarded by not a few scholars as justified through belief. By this, it is implied that for any claim or proposition to count as knowledge, such claim must be a belief that is true and must be justified. Schematically, this is given as S knows that P, IFF, P is true, and S is justified in believing that P, where S refers to the epistemic agent, P to the proposition known. The discipline of epistemology confirms the importance of the idea of knowledge. The defining attribute of epistemology is the idea of knowledge or cognition. The question that we need to ask is, what do we mean by knowledge that epistemology has as its main focus? Knowledge refers to 1. The cognitive aspect of consciousness in general. To know means to perceive or apprehend or to understand or comprehend. 2. Knowledge is also used in contrast to mere opinion, sometimes called belief. In this application, it signifies certitude based on adequate grounds. There may be belief or subjective certitude without objective foundation. 3. Knowledge is further used for what is known as such. Thus, we speak of chemistry as a body of knowledge. Knowledge is used as a synonym for cognition and also to specify a specific cognition. That is, the cognition that satisfies 3 conditions, which are 1. Truth, 2. Self-satisfying, and indubitability. 3. Logically impossible to falsify. The above meanings of the concept knowledge has implicitly defined the scope of epistemology. Epistemology is interested in the discussion and analysis of the process of interaction of the human mind, subject of knowledge, with the external world, object of knowledge. It is the task of epistemology to understand the process of how humans become conscious of external objects. But we need to mention that epistemological analysis of consciousness differs from the psychological investigation of it. While the latter is interested in the description of the process of cognition by employing the empirical method, the former investigates cognitive materials in order to apprehend and prescribe the appropriate means of understanding external realities. Epistemology therefore concerns itself with the study of the process of perception and other modes through which human beings interact with external objects. Another dimension of epistemology which has been exposed by the analysis of knowledge above, concerns the role that epistemology performs in distinguishing knowledge or justifiable belief from opinion or subjective belief. Historically, epistemology started from the Socratic Platonic desire to confront the sophists who denied the possibility of objective knowledge. A major aspect of the epistemological program up till now is the mission of providing the basis for distinguishing objective knowledge from mere opinions. How do we arrive at the criteria for accepting some beliefs as objective knowledge and rejecting others? This issue of epistemic justification is one of the cardinal problems of epistemology that shall also engage our attention. The third dimension of epistemology that earlier analysis of knowledge have identified relates to the concern of the epistemological enterprise for knowledge produced in other disciplines. The fact that knowledge refers to the system of beliefs in other disciplines, apart from philosophy, signifies that epistemology is interested in how knowledge is acquired and justified in other areas, particularly science, which has been adopted as the paradigm or archetype of knowledge. It is in this respect that epistemology is strongly linked to the philosophy of science. One can even say that the latter is a sub-branch of the former, in the sense that philosophy of science employs the basic tools of epistemology for the evolution of scientific knowledge. Finally, let us mention that our discussion of the dimensions of knowledge indicate that the issue of what constitutes knowledge or the conditions that a knowledge claim must satisfy is a serious one in traditional epistemology. What is it for any idea to be called knowledge? What are the conditions that a knowledge claim or body of knowledge must satisfy before it can be accepted as such? Questions of this nature are taken seriously in epistemology. These questions indicate that the definition of knowledge is not taken for granted in epistemology. In fact, serious polemic surrounds the exercise of defining knowledge in philosophy. Like many concepts in philosophy, knowledge is so fundamental and general that it includes itself in its own scope. The peculiar problem that confronts concepts of this nature has been explained by P.C. Jones in the book, The Nature of Knowledge. According to him, an explanation of knowledge must be in terms of something more fundamental than knowledge, and that obviously is something unknown. In examining this issue, we shall focus on how traditional epistemology been able to resolve this dilemma, as well as what has been its reaction to the issue of the conditions of knowledge. This shall engage our attention in the next section. Account of knowledge, traditional versus the Gantier problem. The attempt at defining knowledge is as old as epistemology itself. This desire to define knowledge can be seen in Plato's dialogue, Theaetetus. It was from this dialogue that the traditional account of knowledge as justified true belief emanates. Precisely, the definition of knowledge supplied here is true belief plus logos account, which has been interpreted to mean justified true belief. It is rather surprising that this definition of knowledge that Plato himself vehemently opposed in the Theaetetus turned out to become the acceptable definition of knowledge in traditional epistemology. The traditional account of knowledge is this: X knows that P if and only if A, X has a belief P. B. P is true. C. X is justified in believing that P is true. From this, we can infer that there are three conditions of knowledge, namely 1. Belief, 2. Truth of belief, 3. Justification of belief. This definition of knowledge can be further illustrated by this example. Mr. A knows that Abuja is the capital of Nigeria if 1. Mr. A has a belief that Abuja is the capital of Nigeria. 2. This belief that Abuja is the capital of Nigeria is true. 3. Mr. A is justified in having this belief. This traditional account of knowledge used to be the acceptable definition of knowledge. However, in 1963, it was challenged by Edmund L. Gettier in his short essay, Is Justified True Belief Knowledge? The aim of this influential essay is to refute the conception of knowledge as justified true belief. Gettier's point was that while the three conditions of knowledge as justified true belief may hold for an agent, such agent could not be said to know on the grounds that such agent arrived at such true lucky guess. Gettier demonstrated his position with two counter-examples showing the possibility of having justified true belief without having knowledge. The implication of these examples of Gettier is that there is the need for a fourth condition of knowledge. The problem generated by Gettier's counter-examples and the quest for a fourth condition knowledge has been tagged the Gettier problem. Let us now examine the counter-example supplied by E. L. Gettier. In the first case, Gettier made us to imagine two applicants for a job, Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones. According to him, the following proposition is made by Mr. Smith. A. Jones is the man who will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. The first conjunct in the propositions made by Smith is a product of the statement of the employer that Mr. Jones will be employed. The second conjunct is based on the first-hand experience of Smith, who counted the coins in Mr. Jones' pocket. Assuming Smith goes on to make an inference from this conjunctive proposition that B, the man who will get the job, has 10 coins in his pocket. But supposing B is true, though the man who gets the job is Mr. Smith himself, who accidentally has 10 coins in his pocket. Can we say that proposition B, which fulfills the justified true belief condition, is a knowledge claim? Gettier argues that through proposition B satisfies the three conditions of justification, truth, and belief, it is not a knowledge claim because it is an inference from a false proposition, proposition A. Thus, that proposition B is true is a matter of coincidence. In the second counter-example given by Gettier, he imagined another proposition made by Mr. Smith to the effect that C. Jones owns a Ford car. Gettier imagined further that Smith's proposition is based on the evidence that Jones drives a Ford car, in which Smith once had a free ride. Supposing that Smith has another friend named Brown, whose whereabouts is unknown to Mr. Smith, Smith constructs three sets of disjunctive propositions from the combination of these propositions and merely guesses where his friend, Mr. Brown, may be living at the time he was making the propositions. The propositions are D. Jones owns a Ford car, or Brown is in Boston. E. Jones owns a Ford car, or Brown lives in Barcelona. F. Jones owns a Ford car, or Brown lives in Brest-Litovsk. Gettier goes further to maintain that the propositions will be assumed true by Smith because he feels that the first disjunct, which is common to the three propositions, is true. It is, however, discovered that proposition E is the only correct proposition, not because its first disjunct is true, but because, by mere coincidence, the second disjunct is. That is, Brown lives in Barcelona, but the first disjunct is false because Mr. Jones drives in a rented Ford car. Can we say that proposition E is knowledge? Gettier agrees that proposition E is justified through belief, but it is not knowledge because it is a product of mere coincidence. Gettier therefore concludes that it is possible to have justified true belief without knowledge. Gettier's counter-examples and the demand for a fourth condition of knowledge has generated many reactions in epistemology. Post-Gettier attempts at repairing the traditional account of knowledge can be categorized into four trends according to Jonathan Dancy in his book Introduction to Contemporary Epistemology. The first category of attempt at repairing the traditional account of knowledge is based on the claim that the definition of knowledge should clearly indicate that the constituent belief should not be inferred from a false belief. An example of this type of effort is in Michael Clark's article. The fourth condition of knowledge, according to Clark, is this: the believer's ground for believing a claim does not include any false belief. In a nutshell, the traditional account of knowledge is being repaired by merely adding a fourth condition, which is that there should not be present in any set of beliefs that seeks to graduate to knowledge relevant falsehood. But this amendment has been criticized for being too strong, such that it will be impossible for any of us to know anything. With this new suggestion, we may find it difficult to have a set of beliefs without the prevalence of relevant falsehood. Knowledge will therefore be a rare to get. The second set of post-Gettier account of knowledge say that the fourth condition of knowledge is that there should not be within the system of belief certain truth which would have destroyed the believer's justification. This position has been held by Lehrer and Parsons. Their claim is that justified true belief can still be knowledge on the conditions that there is no other truth that can defeat the justified belief. This category of attempt at solving the Gettier problem has been tagged the divisibility approach. The divisibility approach is related to the third set of amendment, which says that the fourth condition of knowledge is reliability. The reliability approach to the definition of knowledge says that knowledge is justified through belief derived from a reliable method. The last attempt at solving the Gettier problem, which we will examine and consider as the most feasible, is the conclusive reason approach. According to this attempt at repairing the traditional definition of knowledge, justified true belief can still be knowledge if it is based on conclusive reason. By conclusive reason, we mean that if P is the conclusive reason for Q, then P cannot be true if Q is false. In essence, if a particular proposition is knowledge, then the reasons for making it knowledge must be conclusive. This can be so if and only if the reasons cannot be true while the conclusion is false. This approach has also been criticized. Jonathan Dancy argues that this approach will also make knowledge a rare phenomenon. All these objections and criticisms of post-Gettier attempt at redefining knowledge merely point to the fact that The ghost of Gettier counter-examples will continue to haunt epistemology for long. The various attempts at repairing the Gettier traditional account of knowledge complicate rather than improve the situation. John L. Pollock is therefore right where he says, as the literature on the problem has developed, the proposals have become increasingly complex in the attempt to meet more and more complicated counter examples to simple analysis. The result is that even if some very complex analysis should turn out to be immune from counter example, it would seem ad hoc. In retrospect, we need to say that Gettier problem is a typical example of epistemological problem. The desire of epistemology to justify human cognitions makes it imperative for it to be very critical of all ideas. This critical nature explains the reason why it is nearly impossible for philosophy to arrive at the definition of concepts, including the most basic ones such as knowledge. Such a definition needs to be absolutely acceptable to the most critically minded of philosophers. This may rather be difficult, but that simply explains the reasons why philosophy is a critical and polemical enterprise. Studies section summary. In this study section, attempt was made at examining the dimensions of knowledge, which indicates the issue of what constitutes knowledge or the conditions that a knowledge claim. Questions such as, what is it for any idea to be called knowledge? What are the conditions that a knowledge claim or body of knowledge must satisfy before it can be accepted as such? Showed the serious nature of inquiry in epistemology. These questions indicate that the definition of knowledge is not taken for granted in epistemology. This is the end of study section 5. Thanks for listening.